Thank you for joining and welcome from all over the world. My name is Jesseca Collins. I'm one of our US-based Pyramid Educational Consultants, and I am coming to you guys from Bozeman, Montana. So if people are familiar with the United States, I am in western Montana. So welcome. So just a quick introduction. Again, my name is Jessie. I am a teacher, a special education and elementary education teacher, and also a board certified behavior analyst. And I work for Pyramid Educational Consultants. And a little bit kind of just about our company. Pyramid Educational Consultants is actually international, and we provide training and consult and a variety of services. A lot of you guys know our company for teaching about PECS, or Picture Exchange Communication System, but we talk about a lot of different topics relating to functional applied behavior analysis and really just good teaching for a lot of our learners that have autism and developmental disabilities. So today we are going to be talking about managing challenging problem behavior, which I think for me is definitely one of the things that makes my job most interesting, but also something that can be really challenging and exhausting for a lot of us. And, whether we're a parent or a professional working with our kids, that sometimes we have tough days because some of the behaviors that we're kind of connected to. So if you guys in the chat box, I would love to hear who I kind of have joining today. So let me know if you're a parent, if you're a teacher, a speech pathologist, or anything else, other type of therapist, BCBAs. If you guys would share kind of how you're connected to the field, that would be awesome. And again, welcome. I don't see. Okay, so all right, so I see we have some teachers on. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk just kind of about a brief introduction about how we can kind of think about managing challenging problem behavior and some of the things that go along with that particular process. I could talk to you guys about this for way longer than half an hour. I could definitely talk to you about it probably for for weeks at a time. And I see we have some BCBAs in here, so awesome. I'm sure you guys could also talk about this at length. And my whole goal today is to kind of make sure we talk about this in a way that is digestible for any of you guys that are on here, whether you're a parent that has never had any exposure to what do I do when my kid is biting me, or maybe that you're a professional that probably could give this same 30-minute talk. But just kind of thinking about how do we think about some of the behavior that we're dealing with, and what does that process kind of look like, and a little bit of an introduction to that. So we are talking mostly when we're kind of thinking about managing behavior, we're often talking about managing what we would kind of call a learned behavior. A lot of you guys may hear that fancy word, know those words kind of like respondent or operant behavior. But what we kind of say at Pyramid is we're just talking about learned behaviors, which means our behaviors that somewhere along the way our learner has picked up the behavior and that it's been maintained, or what we kind of say reinforced for some reason. So it's kind of hanging around. And when we're thinking about managing or working on maybe getting rid of behavior or increasing or teaching another behavior, we're going to have a lot of teaching involved, and we have to kind of undo some histories with some of the challenging behavior that we want to get rid of, and then we want to kind of build or teach some new histories. And the key word there is teach, to kind of change that behavior around and see the skills that we want to be seen, and maybe instead of some of the things that we don't want to be. So everything we are going to talk about today is grounded in applied behavior analysis. It sounds like some of you guys are very familiar with you guys. Other people may find that word a little bit intimidating or even just kind of scary, but we're going to kind of talk about functional applied behavior analysis. And essentially what we're going to talk about is just about teaching and learning, and kind of how to specifically do that when we're talking about challenging behavior. So I'm sure a lot of you guys on here have heard of this thing we call the ABCs, so antecedent behavior consequence, and that's kind of what I want to kind of lay out as the foundation for what we're going to be kind of talking about is how can we change the B or the behavior. And so what do we need to kind of look at in regards to what's happening in the behavior, or what we call the A or the antecedent, and maybe also taking a look at what's happening after the behavior, the consequence. And when we talk about ABCs, we don't mean consequence meaning bad. What we're going to kind of try to have you guys think about that word in the sense of just something that comes after a behavior. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of this, but we often talk about the ABCs. That stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. Antecedent is just simply kind of what's preceding or coming before the behavior. The consequence is not necessarily bad. It just means it's coming after the behavior. And one of the ways that we change behavior, or we address that B, whether it's talking about increasing things that we want to see or getting rid of other things, what we have to do is manipulate or take a look at how we can change or tweak the what comes before and what comes after, and then we can kind of go from there. So I'm sure if I started to survey all of you guys that are on here, there would be a large number of people that would have a large number of behaviors or things that you may be dealing with in your learning environment, whether that's home or school. I know for a lot of us, school is happening virtually right now, but most of us, regardless of the learners that we're working with, of their age, of their diagnosis, of the setting or environment that they are in, there are some things in regards to behavior that we typically would like to kind of decrease or have our kid move away from. And so kind of the process that we kind of follow when we're thinking about that is what I'm going to kind of describe today. So I'm just going to give you guys a really brief overview of whether we're talking about a kid biting, we're talking about a kid, maybe using inappropriate language or cursing at you, breaking their pencil, eloping or dropping to the floor or hitting someone, that kind of regardless of the behavior, the process is going to follow a similar pattern of what we're going to kind of talk about how we want you to think about this. And so the first thing that if you guys are dealing with some type of challenging behavior, something that we would want you to think about, and we call it contextually inappropriate behavior. Okay, so at Pyramid, the way we talk about challenging behavior is we call it contextually inappropriate. And that's because essentially all of the behaviors that you guys are seeing in your learning environments, it's not the behavior that's happening that's always wrong. Sometimes it's that it's just happening in the wrong place or location. So often when we do other trainings and stuff, and I can't really directly interact with you guys here, but we might say, is it ever appropriate to hit someone? And people will often reply, no, it's not okay to hit someone. And so then we'll kind of push you a little bit further and have you trying to think about, well, under what conditions or at what time might it be okay to hit someone? And people will start to share with us, well, when you're a boxer or an MMA fighter, you're getting paid a lot of money to hit people. Okay, totally appropriate for them to hit each other in the boxing ring. Or if I give you a high five or I hit a bug off your shoulder, that would be totally okay reason for me to hit you. If you were being assaulted or attacked, it would be an appropriate time to hit someone. So most of the time, the behaviors that we're dealing with that we would like to see go away, it's not that the behavior is always wrong or incorrect. It's typically that it's happening in a contextually inappropriate situation. And so that's why at Pyramid, we talk about behavior. We call it contextually inappropriate behavior. And by that, we mean that the behavior is happening at the wrong place, it's happening at the wrong time, it's happening for too long, or maybe it's just not happening, it's kind of too weak in a kid's repertoire. And so once you kind of identified something that is contextually inappropriate that you would like to address for your student, whether that's in home, that's in the community, that's in school, wherever we're kind of having the challenges, then what we would want to start to do is think about this process of how we can impact and potentially reduce that challenging behavior and increase and teach some replacement behaviors. So the process that we kind of navigate through, regardless of the contextually inappropriate that we're dealing with, is the first thing is that we would want to identify that behavior. And so when I talk about identifying the behavior, what I'm kind of talking about is just simply talking about openly with your team or whoever it is, what does that behavior look like? Okay, the kid's hitting. Let's describe when they're hitting. And we kind of want to be able to talk through essentially almost writing a definition or example for what the behavior looks like, so that if I randomly came into your room, I would know what I'm looking for. So when Anne hits someone, I would know what type of hitting I'm looking for that you guys are kind of feeling is inappropriate or contextually inappropriate. And then oftentimes, even when I write those definitions or kind of identify what the behavior is, I'll even kind of give examples and non-examples. So if Anne gives someone a high five, that's totally okay. if Anne punches someone in the face during math class, that is not okay. So kind of thinking about what does the behavior look like? Let's describe it. Some of you guys may have heard this term operationally define, but you don't need to say that fancy of language. You can just simply say, we're going to talk about what the behavior looks like, and then we're going to give examples and non-examples. And that's so that everyone's kind of that's working with the student knows what we're kind of tackle with or deal with. And then from there, we want to make sure we get a baseline. Okay, and so once we kind of identify what we're dealing with, the form of the behavior, then we want to kind of really have a good look at how often is it actually happening? I think sometimes we might think, oh my gosh, this kid is hitting me all day long. And then when we take some data, maybe he's hitting 10 times a day, which feels like all day long. And a kid that's hitting, once per minute versus once per hour, we, very different kind of things going on there. So it's really good to collect some data and kind of take a look at the behavior in two ways. Okay, the first one is maybe just getting a look at a frequency count or a duration, and kind of the way that you would take some maybe numbers-based data around the behavior really depends on the behavior your learner's engaging in and what kind of information you want to know about it. But let's say I am dealing with something like hitting or, breaking their pencil or something. I may kind of start to take a look at how many times does that occur? What is the rate or the frequency, or how long does it occur? The kid engages in crying behavior, he's crying every time he cries for an average of 20 minutes. And it happens about 5 times a day. So just kind of collecting some of that numerical information. The other thing we want to be looking at when we're collecting that baseline is those ABCs. Okay, and so the reason we're doing that is because just knowing what the behavior looks like and how often it's happening doesn't really help us move forward in regards to our intervention. Okay, so those are still really foundational pieces, but what we kind of need to think about is what's going on, what's happening before and after the behavior that may help us kind of be a detective and figure out what we could potentially do to get rid of that potential challenging or contextually inappropriate behavior that we don't want to see. And so a lot of times I may just kind of take some kind of anecdotal data, just writing down or even using an ABC type chart and just looking at, okay, what happens before? For example, every time I place a meal in front of my student starts pushing the food away and cursing at their mom. Okay. And then I'm like, okay, well, what happens when she does that? Mom starts yelling at the kid. Okay. Well, that would be what's happening before and after. So I know sometimes the tricky thing about taking ABC data is that we want to be honest. So sometimes we don't write that I yelled at my student or my child, or I got aggravated, or I chased after the student, or whatever's happening. But we want to be really honest when we're looking at what's happening before and after the behavior, because if we're not honest about what's occurring, then it's going to be hard for us to kind of troubleshoot that. So just taking a really honest kind of candid look at when that behavior occurs, what happened right before it, and what happened right after it. Okay, and then once you've kind of done those two things, then we can kind of go into this process of trying to figure out why we think something's happening. And so once we have that form, that general information, we have some guesses or some anecdotal information about what's been happening before and after the behavior, we can start to think about why do we think it's happening. And the main reason, the main way that we kind of intervene on contextually inappropriate behavior is that we start to look at that why, or what we call the function. Okay. And if a behavior is hanging around and you're still seeing it, it is being paid or reinforced in some way. And so as humans, this is not just specific to individuals with autism or developmental disabilities. There are kind of like 3 main categories that we talk about of ways that may be paying the behavior that you're seeing from your learner. The first one is that the behavior may be getting some attention. And so whether it's really positive attention or it may even be negative attention, what could be maintaining a particular behavior is attention. So in the example I gave you, the student is cursing or using inappropriate language at their mother. The mother is yelling back at them and telling them, don't use that language, or we don't use that word in this family. And even though that feels like it should be helping it go away, there's a possibility that that attention, even though it's yelling, could actually be making that cursing or that bad language kind of hang around. And so that's kind of what we're trying to look at here. And so the first category is access to attention. Okay. The second one is access. This also, so it's not just attention, it could also be access to other things. So it could be access to sensory input. We kind of talk about access as a whole, access to tangible things. So maybe when the kid cries, they get the cookie. Maybe when they run away, someone catches them and gives them a lot of sensory input. Okay, and so access to attention, access to tangibles, access to input or sensory stuff, and I kind of misspoke. Access is actually the first reason why we may be engaging in a specific behavior. Okay. The second is actually possibly escape. So I'm sure all of you guys have been out somewhere, maybe in your local community. You see your really chatty, sweet, elderly neighbor, and you maybe you run away or push your shopping cart really fast down the store, or you pretend like you're looking at something trying to avoid eye contact. And it's not because you dislike your neighbor, it's just because you don't have time for a 45-minute conversation right now. And so that running or that turning your head and looking, that's kind of, you're trying to escape or avoid a conversation. And so one of the other reasons that we behave is to sometimes escape things. Okay, so it could be, in our learning environments, it could actually be every time I put down math work, the kid wants to escape it. Every time, Miss Jessie comes in, the kid wants to escape me. It could be a particular location because maybe in the speech office, they're mowing the lawn, during the speech session, and it's really loud and they don't want to go in the speech room because it's too noisy. And so it doesn't always have to be escape from work. It could just be escape from a variety of different things, but that's one of the other often reasons why a particular behavior is being maintained. Okay. And the third kind of category we talk about is what we call elicited behavior. And so sometimes something happens and that causes us to get upset. So I know none of us have really been flying right now, but for example, go to an airport when a flight is canceled, and you will see a whole lot of elicited behavior from typically developing adults. So, especially if you're going to miss your child's graduation, or you're headed to a wedding, or there's something really important you're trying to get home to and the flight gets canceled, we're going to kind of react to that. And so one of the other things that kind of triggers or causes behavior is that something in the A category, the antecedent, happens, reinforcement changes, someone tells you no, you have to wait, there's something in the environment that happens. Pain potentially could elicit behavior, and then the behavior occurs kind of after that. And so those are kind of the three main categories of maybe the why of behavior could occur. And that's we could go into way more depth with that. And when you are doing this with your learners, you need to kind of do this in more individualized. But essentially that process, again, is we kind of want to identify the behavior, look at what's happening before and after, and getting an idea of kind of how often it's occurring. Then we want to try to take a guess at what we think the function is, or the why. And the tricky thing about function is that it's not always that clean. So it's not always just one particular function. It can kind of be maintained by more than one. And the tricky thing is that biting doesn't always mean it's access to attention, and hitting is access to Skittles. Your kid could bite you at 1 o'clock for one thing, and at 1:05 for escape, and at 1:10 because you told them no and it elicited some behavior. So that's kind of the tricky thing of being a behavioral detective, is that we got to do some work to kind of figure out why we think something's happening. And then once we kind of identify why something's happening, then what we can do is we want to essentially teach. We want to teach to the new behavior that we would like to see. And the most important thing about this, we call this a FEB at Pyramid, a functionally equivalent alternate behavior. We want to make sure that the new behavior that we're trying to teach is going to serve the same function as the behavior that we're trying to get rid of. So kind of an example I was giving you earlier, there's a daughter that's pushing her food away, and let's look specifically at the fact that she's, cursing at mom, and then cursing at mom is giving her attention. If we wanted to give her a more appropriate way to gain her mom's attention instead of using poor language, then we would maybe need to teach her to say look, or to gain her attention in some way, and that would be a replacement behavior that serves the same function, right? The cursing is getting the mom attention. If I say look, or tap her on the shoulder, or make some type of listen to me, gain attention response, that would also get the mom's attention. And as a parent, we would probably prefer that our kid says to us, hey, look, or talk with me, versus cursing at us to get our attention. And so that's what we kind of want to be thinking about. When we start to teach the new behaviors, we want to make sure that the replacement behavior, okay, so the functionally equivalent alternate behavior, or some people call it a FERB, a replacement behavior, matches or serves the same function as the behavior we're trying to get rid of. So often I kind of say, if I was staying in a hotel and I was going to the 5th floor, I would typically take the elevator. But if the elevator is broken, I would take the stairs. Okay, and so whether I take the elevator or take the stairs, both of those ways are going to get me to the 5th floor. So that's kind of an easy way to think about, if you're thinking about, okay, biting is getting my kid access to chocolate milk. Now we need to think about, okay, what's a better, more preferred, less aversive way that our kid could do something to get access to chocolate milk? And in this case, it would probably be to just ask for it, right? So that's one of the next things we're kind of thinking about, is then we would want to identify that replacement behavior. And then once we identify the behavior, then we need to teach it. Okay, we need to teach it, and we need to pay it or reinforce it. So, once you identify, now I'm going to teach my kid to ask for chocolate milk, you would want to set up opportunities to prompt, help, teach them to do that. And you'd also want to make sure that we reinforce or pay that. Okay, so that's kind of that process of, to not get into something too specific, we are essentially identifying the behavior, we're defining it, we are getting some baseline on what's happening before and after it, as well as maybe about a frequency or a duration or some numerical understanding of how often the behavior is occurring. Then we're doing some collaborating and thinking about, why do we think this is being maintained? What's the function? And then once we think we identify that function, then we're identifying a replacement or alternate behavior that serves the same function. And then we're going to kind of teach and reinforce that. So that's kind of like a very brief introduction to a fairly complicated process. But just to get you guys kind of thinking about, again, regardless of the behavior, regardless of the age of your student, regardless of your kid's diagnosis, regardless of if they have a disability or not, that would be the process that I would continue to follow to kind of address contextually inappropriate behaviors that I wanted to deal with. So I just wanted to really quickly this ties in a little bit, I'm not sure, into what we call at Pyramid, the pyramid approach to education. So this book actually totally changed, prior to ever working for Pyramid, this book totally changed my teaching career and what kind of started to get me thinking about this. The pyramid approach talks about tackling contextually inappropriate behaviors as kind of one of its tenets, but it also talks about addressing proactively a lot of other things, like teaching communication, like making sure we're doing functional activities, like making sure we're generalizing skills with our students to kind of think about supporting us in reducing those challenging behaviors and increasing the behaviors that we want to see. So hopefully you feel like this gave you a little bit of kind of really basic, simple information. I highly recommend checking out our website if you haven't been there before. So if you're in the U.S., PACSUSA.com, or if you guys that are joining internationally, just go to PACS.com. You can check out our website, click on the country of the language that you speak, and a lot of our websites are translated into some of your native languages and can find resources in your country. On our website, we have lots of free information. We have access to a lot of free downloads, a lot of free lesson examples, a lot of access to some pictures. So there's lots of information on there. So I definitely recommend checking out our website. If you're more interested in learning about managing challenging problem behavior and you'd like to dig in a little more thoroughly than this little 30-minute live video, we are going to be presenting the Guide to Managing Challenging Problem Behavior on July 31st in the United States remotely via Zoom. It's going to be presented on Pacific time. And so it will be West Coast California Pacific time, and that will be again on July 31st. So definitely you can take a look or visit our website, and if you're interested, we'll dig into that for a full day of training, really go into practicing what we just talked about, and actually going through kind of that process or what that may look like for your student, and talking a lot more about replacement behaviors and what's happening before and after, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure, I'm right about at 25 minutes, so I want to make sure, as I promised, that I could leave some time for questions. I know you guys can't talk, I don't think, but if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to chat in your kind of in your comment box, and I'm happy to take the next 5 minutes for some questions. All right, it doesn't look like there are any questions, but please feel free to find us on our Facebook page, or you could always email us and just check in. And I see we have someone from Brazil. Awesome. So I've actually had the opportunity to train some individuals. They came actually out to Denver when I was living in Denver from Brazil. So welcome. But yeah, we're happy to help out. And I'll just really quickly, my email is jcollins, JCOLLINS @pex.com. So if anyone that's on here has any questions or just wants to reach out or needs help getting connected with any support in your country or in your state, then please feel free to shoot me an email. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful night, morning, afternoon, whatever time it is for you, and we'll see you next time.